In this film, we will be exploring one of the Methodist Church's principles for justice. We'll be doing this alongside 8 different Methodists. God calls us to live in hope. What does hope look like for you?
I think as someone seeking justice, living in hope looks like being absolutely grounded in the reality of the world as it is, but also being able to anticipate and look for signs of the coming world as it could and should be, as God intended it.
I feel very often hopeless in the face of injustices, and I suppose even more so because someone who's not experiencing the injustice themselves, I'm seeing it from the outside. And what surprises me is the hope within that situation of injustice is present there. I see it very often in those who are experiencing the injustice themselves, that very often there is something in them that shows that they are not giving up, that they do see a possibility of a brighter future that I'm struggling to see.
I believe that God's goodness for us doesn't just exist in eternity, but happens here on earth. And so my hope comes from noticing those glimpses of goodness, whether it is a small experience of justice, whether it's a small experience of reconciliation, of refound trust, anything where we see God's goodness breaking through brings me hope to remember that it can happen here and now.
A hopeful community is a community that knows that rain falls but for a moment. And there comes a time when the saturated ground will receive that rain in a positive, germinative way so that something sprouts that is good out of that rain having fallen. A hopeful community, a hopeful Christian community, is one that places faith firmly at every occurrence, whether it be a negative or a positive occurrence, and one that trusts what he has shown you, O man, what is good and what is right, and what does the Lord require of you. If we trust that statement, if we trust that biblical imperative, we can't help but be hopeful. Because if God has shown us before, surely God will show us again. And if God has held us before, surely God will continue to hold us for the future.
God calls us to live in the pattern of God's kingdom. What images help you to think about God's kingdom?
There's a beautiful image in Isaiah of a longed-for messenger arriving, of the beauty of those dusty, exhausted feet rushing towards a community who perhaps feared they'd been forgotten or overlooked, and saying, "This is it, the good news is here. Justice and redemption and freedom are finally here." And that image always stays with me.
I always think about the story of Jesus meeting the woman at the well as an example of a story of justice. But interestingly, perhaps just the ending, where that woman runs back into her community and tells them about all the things she has seen, about the Jesus that she has met. And that's a story of justice for me, because it reminds us of the power of our personal encounters with Jesus, that when we are changed and transformed by Jesus' good news, that we then have the power and the opportunity to share that, to change that, the lives of others by sharing that story too.
There is an image that appears in a book by Donald Messer. The book's called Conspiracy of Goodness. And in it he uses lots of different images. But the one that really struck me is that the church should be a community of fence movers. And he got that image from something that happened soon after the First World War in Poland, where there were a group of Quakers going in to provide food and clothing and shelter for those who'd been ravaged by war. And one of these Quakers, much loved in this particular village, caught typhoid fever, died within 24 hours, and they needed to bury him. The only cemetery in that village was a Roman Catholic cemetery, and the laws of the Roman Catholic Church did not allow a Quaker to be buried in the cemetery. So they buried him just outside the fence of the cemetery. And then overnight, the Roman Catholic laity came out and they moved the fence of the cemetery so that he was brought within it. And that whole image of bringing those who are thought rightly to be outside and beyond the boundary, bringing them within by moving the fence, I think is a profoundly Christ-like image.
Disabled people often talk about the barriers that they face every day. It might be, for example, trying to attend an event and there not being an interpreter present, or trying to access a building as a wheelchair user and discovering that there isn't a ramp. Attitudes can also create barriers. But when I think the beauty of the kingdom of God, of what a world would be like without barriers, where we all have an equal seat at the table with God, that inspires me. I work every day to try to bring that vision of the kingdom of God to fruition. I think about how we can remove barriers, how our churches can remove barriers, and how that brings us one step closer to the kingdom of God.
An image for me of God's kingdom is probably a picture that is probably rife even on the internet about it's a two-setter. The first set is of people sitting around the table with a huge bowl of food in the middle and long spoons. And they all have to dip into this bowl and try and eat. But everybody is more emaciated around this table because they can't, whilst there is food, they can't eat. The second set of the picture is the same people around the table, big bowl of food in the middle, and the people are now using their spoons to feed each other rather than to try and feed themselves. And they're all well fed, and they all look very healthy because they've discovered what it means to be made in the image of God and to live their community in the image of God, which is about giving of yourself to another. Sometimes not expecting anything in return, but that as you do so, you get also to be cared for in that same process.
Jesus taught us to pray, "Your kingdom come." I'm amazed that after that phrase, he says, "Give us our daily bread. Forgive us our debt. Keep us strong in the hour of trial. Deliver us from evil." Those four things are what he meant by the kingdom of God.
I think my favourite image of the kingdom of God is it's actually an image of creation almost, where there's a child sat with an arm around a lion and just that harmony and everything in order and peacefully together.
What challenges does this principle raise for you?
Some people have found the idea of decolonising a really helpful way of thinking anew about God and God's character. Some people find it a challenging thing to understand and get their heads around. But for me, when we think about decolonising, we're thinking about our understanding of God our understanding of ourselves as Christians and what we think our part is to play in justice seeking. When we think about decolonising, we become aware of our own preconceived ideas. We can be freed from the idea that somehow we're in charge of justice and transformation, that we're the main character in the story. And instead, we're invited to see things differently, to recognise the beautiful diversity of God's creation, the wealth of understanding and experience that comes when we're prepared to listen to the stories of others, to step back and stand in solidarity with and alongside people.
But also it's a little bit complicated because in the process of decolonizing, we have to be careful to don't be a localized church now. And when you localize, you think in yourself, in your problems, in your situations, and you are not aware of the problems that are around the world.
God's justice requires restitution in that God doesn't just simply go into a situation, sees what is wrong, and inspire people to do something about it, and then becomes removed. God also works in those people to put right what was wrong.
With some of my friends in the deaf community, I often attend protests. I think it's important that we make sure that the public are aware of the barriers we face. And while I think that protesting is good, one must always be careful that we are protesting politely. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? A polite protest. We must be creative in our protesting, creative resistance.
We need to be part of the solution. We are not the solution because God is the only answer for the world, of course, but we have a big implications. For some reason, God doesn't like, for some reason, God likes to use human hands to transform reality. Even in our personal salvation, He offered His life for us, but we have to do something. We have to receive it. We have to be willing to receive it. So human beings' actions are gonna to contribute to brings people to human actions are gonna help to build the kingdom of the Lord here as well. Not because we are great people, but because God wants to use us to transform.